The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor of Marcus's home office. Hot liquid splashed across the divorce papers scattered on his desk, but the words were already burned into my memory. Irreconcilable differences. Division of assets. Petitioner seeks full custody of minor children. My husband of 12 years had been planning to leave me, and I'd discovered it by accident while looking for his passport for our supposed second honeymoon to Italy next month. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind racing through the implications. Marcus thought he was being clever, filing first to gain the advantage. What he didn't know was that I'd been managing our family's finances for years while he played the role of successful investment banker. Every account, every asset, every carefully hidden offshore trust, I knew about them all. The irony was delicious. While Marcus spent his evenings working late with his 25-year-old assistant Jennifer, yes, I'd known about that for months, I'd been quietly building our empire. The man who thought his wife was just a pretty face with a Yale MBA had no idea that the portfolio he bragged about to his golf buddies was actually my creation. I bent down to collect the papers, my hands surprisingly steady. The filing date was still 2 weeks away, giving me time to prepare. As I read through the documents, Marcus's strategy became clear. Claim that his income as managing director at Blackstone and Associates was the primary source of our wealth. Minimize my contributions and paint me as a dependent housewife who'd never worked a day in her life. The petition made me laugh. Marcus was requesting sole custody of our twins, Emma and Ethan, claiming I was emotionally unstable and unsuited for parenting responsibilities. He'd even included fabricated incidents, claiming I'd been drinking excessively and neglecting the children. It was a masterclass in legal manipulation, except for one crucial detail. He'd underestimated the woman he'd married. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. Love. The word felt hollow now, meaningless after what I'd discovered. But I typed back, "Of course, darling. I'll keep dinner warm for you." I needed to think, to plan. Moving to his leather chair, the one he'd bought to celebrate his latest promotion, I opened his laptop. Marcus had always been careless with passwords, using variations of his birthday and our anniversary. Within minutes, I was reviewing his recent activity. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The evidence was worse than I'd imagined. Email chains with Jennifer discussing their future together, searches for bachelor apartments in Manhattan's Upper East Side, and most damning of all, communications with a private investigator he'd hired to build a case against me. They'd been documenting my daily routine, photographing me at coffee shops, even following me to Emma and Ethan's school events, looking for any behavior that could be twisted to support his narrative. But Marcus had made a critical error. In his arrogance, he'd been sloppy. Every search, every email, every financial transaction was automatically backed up to our shared cloud storage, a system I'd set up years ago for security purposes. He'd been creating evidence against himself while thinking he was being clever. Pulled up our financial dashboard, a complex web of accounts I'd built over the years. Marcus saw only the surface level, our joint checking account, his 401k, our investment portfolio with Merrill Lynch. What he didn't see were the 18 offshore accounts, the shell companies I'd established, the cryptocurrency wallets, and the various trusts I'd created using my maiden name. The scale of our actual wealth would have shocked him. While Marcus bragged about our comfortable lifestyle, the reality was that we were worth over $47 million. Every bonus he'd received, every stock option, every inheritance from his grandmother, I'd taken his money and multiplied it through careful investments and strategic planning. Now, looking at the divorce papers, I realized Marcus's plan was even more audacious than simple infidelity. He was planning to hide assets, claim our wealth was worth far less than reality, and leave me with a settlement that wouldn't even cover a year of private school for the twins. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I began documenting everything. Screenshots of his emails with Jennifer, records of his searches for apartments, evidence of the private investigator, and most importantly, proof that every major financial decision in our marriage had been my strategy, my work, my success. The sound of the garage door opening sent me into action. I quickly cleared the laptop's history, repositioned the divorce papers exactly as I'd found them, and cleaned up the coffee spill. By the time Marcus walked through the front door, I was in the kitchen, preparing his favorite meal with a smile on my face. "Smells incredible in here," he said, kissing my cheek with the same lips that had been lying to me for months. "You're amazing, you know that?" "Just taking care of my family," I replied, serving him a plate. "How was your day?" Marcus launched into his usual routine, complaining about difficult clients and office politics, never mentioning Jennifer or divorce papers or private investigators. I nodded and smiled, playing the devoted wife while my mind worked through the logistics of what needed to happen next. After dinner, as Marcus settled into his recliner to watch the game, I excused myself to check on the twins. Emma and Ethan were in the playroom, working on homework and chatting about their day at school. Watching them, their innocent laughter, their trust that their world was secure, I felt a surge of protective fury. Marcus wasn't just betraying me. He was planning to tear apart their lives too. His petition claimed I was unfit, that they'd be better off with him and his new 25-year-old girlfriend. The same man who'd missed more soccer games than he'd attended, who'd never once helped with homework or bedtime routines, who thought parenting meant writing checks for private school and calling it love. "Mom, you okay?" Emma looked up from her math worksheet, her father's green eyes filled with concern. "Perfect, sweetheart," I said, kissing the top of her head. "Just thinking about how much I love you and your brother." Ethan grinned, showing the gap where he'd lost a tooth last week. "Love you too, Mom. Can we have pancakes tomorrow?" "Absolutely," I promised, knowing that by tomorrow everything would be different. Later that night, after Marcus had fallen asleep, probably dreaming of his new life with Jennifer, I returned to his office. This time, I wasn't just discovering his betrayal, I was planning my response. I opened a secure connection to my private server, the one Marcus didn't know existed, and began the process that would change everything. Every account, every investment, every asset that I'd built over 12 years of marriage, it was time to protect what was mine. The first transfer was small, just $50,000 from our joint savings to one of my offshore accounts. A test to see if Marcus was monitoring transactions. When no alerts came, I moved to phase 2. By 3 a.m., I'd relocated over $12 million across various accounts, all using legal methods I'd established years earlier. The beauty of having multiple shell companies and offshore trusts was that every transfer appeared legitimate, moving money between different aspects of our business ventures. Marcus stirred in his sleep as I slipped back into bed, muttering something about quarterly reports. I lay beside him, this man I'd loved and trusted and built a life with, watching him sleep peacefully while planning to destroy our family. But the game had changed now. Marcus thought he was playing chess while I'd been building the board all along. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of protecting everything we'd built, everything I'd built. The twins' college funds, their trust accounts, the investment properties, the vacation home in the Hamptons, even Marcus's precious boat that he thought was titled in his name but was actually owned by one of my companies. By the time Marcus filed his divorce papers in 2 weeks, he'd discover that the fortune he was planning to hide had already been moved beyond his reach. Every asset he thought he could claim, every account he planned to drain, every advantage he believed he had, gone. I closed my eyes, finally feeling peaceful for the first time in months. Marcus had taught me an important lesson. Sometimes the person you trust most is the one who betrays you deepest. But he was about to learn something too. Never underestimate the woman who's been quietly managing your money while you were busy cheating on her. The real game was just beginning, and Marcus had no idea he was already 12 moves behind. The morning arrived with Marcus humming in the shower, completely oblivious to the financial earthquake that had occurred while he slept. I made his coffee exactly how he liked it, 2 sugars, splash of cream, and watched him scroll through his phone at the breakfast table, probably texting Jennifer about their weekend plans. "Big presentation today," he announced, straightening his Hermes tie. "The Henderson merger should close by Friday. Bonus alone will cover Emma's orthodontist bills for the next 2 years. I smiled, buttering his toast. "That's wonderful, darling. You work so hard for this family." What Marcus didn't realize was that the Henderson merger was partially funded through one of my shell companies. His brilliant deal-making was actually my capital at work, and the bonus he was bragging about was technically my money paying him to use my money. The irony would have been hilarious if it weren't so infuriating. After he left for the office, I called my sister Rachel. If Marcus had his private investigator, I needed my own allies, and Rachel was a family law attorney with a reputation for destroying cheating husbands in court. "Claire, what's wrong?" Rachel's voice was sharp with concern. "You sound terrible." "I need to see you. Today. It's about Marcus." 2 hours later, I was sitting in Rachel's downtown office, watching her face grow darker as she reviewed copies of Marcus's divorce papers and the evidence I'd compiled overnight. "This is sophisticated," she said finally, setting down the documents. "He's been planning this for months, maybe longer. The private investigator, the manufactured evidence, the strategic timing. This isn't amateur hour. Which means his attorney is expensive and experienced. Probably someone who specializes in high-net-worth divorces where the husband wants to keep everything." Rachel leaned back in her chair. "But they made one crucial mistake." "What's that?" "They assumed you were just another trophy wife who'd roll over and accept whatever scraps they offered." She grinned, the same predatory smile that had terrorized opposing counsel for 15 years. "They have no idea what they're dealing with." I opened my laptop and showed Rachel the financial dashboard I'd built. Her eyes widened as she scrolled, through account after account, investment after investment, each one meticulously documented and legally structured. "Holy shit, Claire. You're not just wealthy, you're fuck you wealthy." She looked up from the screen. "Marcus has no idea about any of this? He thinks we're worth maybe $8 million, mostly from his salary and bonuses. He has no clue about the offshore accounts, the cryptocurrency, the shell companies, or the real estate investments I've made using different entities." Rachel was quiet for a long moment, studying the numbers. "This changes everything. With assets like this, you're not just protecting yourself, you're protecting a fortune. But Claire, if you're planning what I think you're planning, we need to be very careful. Asset concealment can backfire spectacularly if not done properly." "I'm not concealing assets," I corrected. "I'm protecting assets that are legally mine. Every account, every investment, every company, they're all properly documented and above board. Marcus's name isn't on any of them because he never contributed to them directly." "Even better." Rachel's fingers flew across her keyboard. "I'm going to make some calls. There are people you need to meet." The first call was to David Chen, a forensic accountant who specialized in complex financial cases. The second was to Margaret Torres, a private investigator who'd built her career, exposing cheating spouses. By noon, I had a war council assembled in Rachel's conference room. "The timeline is crucial," David explained, reviewing the documents I'd provided. "Marcus plans to file in 2 weeks, but discovery won't begin for at least a month after that. We have a narrow window to ensure all assets are properly positioned. Margaret had already begun her own investigation. Jennifer Walsh, 25, MBA from Northwestern. She's been with Blackstone for 8 months, started as Marcus's assistant but recently promoted to junior analyst. They've been meeting at the Meridian Hotel every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 3 months. She slid photographs across the table, Marcus and Jennifer entering the hotel lobby, sharing intimate dinners at expensive restaurants, holding hands in Central Park. The cow. Evidence was damning and comprehensive. Here's what's interesting, Margaret continued. Jennifer isn't just his affair partner, she's also pregnant. The room fell silent. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, but my voice remained steady. How pregnant? About 12 weeks. Based on her recent medical appointments. She's been very careful to hide it, but pregnancy hormones don't lie. Rachel leaned forward. This explains the timeline. Marcus isn't just leaving you for a younger woman, he's leaving to play house. With his pregnant mistress. The urgency makes sense now. I thought about Emma and Ethan. About how Marcus was planning to claim he'd be a better parent while simultaneously abandoning them for a new family. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd imagined possible. There's more, Margaret said. I've been monitoring Jennifer's communications. She's been in contact with Marcus's divorce attorney, providing information about your daily routines, your interactions with the children, anything that could be used to support the unfit mother narrative. David cleared his throat. From a financial perspective, Marcus has been sloppy. He's been using company credit cards for personal expenses related to the affair. Hotel rooms, dinners, gifts for Jennifer. His employer would be very interested to know about the policy violations. Not yet, I said. I don't want to tip our hand. Let him continue digging his own grave. The afternoon was spent strategizing. Rachel would prepare counterfiling documents but hold them until Marcus made his move. David would create a comprehensive audit of all marital assets, highlighting my contributions and Marcus's attempts at concealment. Margaret would continue surveillance, building an airtight case of infidelity and financial misconduct. What about the children? Rachel asked. Marcus's custody claim is aggressive. We need to be prepared. I pulled out my phone and showed them videos I'd been quietly recording for months. Emma and Ethan doing homework while Marcus watched television. Me helping with school projects while Marcus worked late. Birthday parties, soccer games, parent-teacher conferences, all attended by me while Marcus was mysteriously absent. I've been documenting everything since I first suspected he was cheating, I explained. Not because I was planning for divorce, but because I wanted to understand why my husband was becoming a stranger. Margaret smiled approvingly. Smart. Most people start gathering evidence after they discover the affair. You've got months of proof showing the real family dynamic. As the meeting wrapped up, David handed me a secure phone and encrypted laptop. For the financial transfers, everything needs to be documented and traceable, but through protected channels. If Marcus's team discovers what we're doing too early, they could try to freeze assets. That evening, I returned home to find Marcus in an unusually good mood. He was playing video games with Ethan while Emma did homework nearby, a rare display. A family engagement that would have warmed my heart a week ago. Now it felt like performance art. How was your day? He asked, not looking away from the screen. Productive. I had lunch with Rachel, then did some shopping. I settled into the chair beside Emma, helping her with a math problem. How was the presentation? Brilliant. Henderson merger is moving forward ahead of schedule. We should celebrate this weekend. He paused the game and looked at me with what seemed like genuine affection. Maybe dinner at Le Bernardin? Just the two of us? For a moment, I almost believed him. Almost forgot about the divorce papers and the pregnant mistress and the private investigator documenting my every move. Marcus could be charming when he, wanted to be. It's how he'd won me over 12 years ago. That sounds lovely, I replied, knowing that by this weekend, our marriage would be over. Later, after the children were asleep and Marcus was in his office, Reviewing contracts, I began the next phase of asset protection. Using David's encrypted system, I accessed accounts that hadn't been touched in years. Emergency funds I'd established early in our marriage, investments made using my maiden name, properties purchased through various LLCs. The process was methodical and precise. Every transfer was documented, every movement of funds carefully justified. I wasn't stealing or hiding money. I was reorganizing assets to reflect their true ownership. Marcus's salary and bonuses represented perhaps 20% of our total wealth. The other 80% was mine, built through careful investment of my own inheritance, strategic use of his income, and years of financial planning he'd never bothered to understand. At 2 a.m., my secure phone buzzed with a message from Margaret. Jennifer Walsh visited her doctor today. Ultrasound confirmed healthy pregnancy, due date in May. She's already been looking at 3-bedroom apartments in Marcus's preferred neighborhood. I stared at the message, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Anger at Marcus's betrayal, sadness for the end of our marriage, but also something unexpected. Relief. For months, I'd been questioning myself, wondering if I was imagining problems that didn't exist. Now I had confirmation that my instincts had been correct. Marcus was building a new life while systematically dismantling our old one, but he'd made a critical error in assuming I was weak, dependent, and naive. He saw a housewife. I was a financial strategist. He saw a victim. I was preparing to be a victor. By morning, another $8 million had been moved to secure accounts. The transactions appeared as routine investment rebalancing, the kind of financial management I'd been doing for years. Marcus would see the account summaries during his monthly review and assume everything was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. In less than 2 weeks, Marcus would file for divorce, expecting to negotiate from a position of strength. He'd offer me a settlement he considered generous, perhaps $2 million and supervised visitation, with the children, never realizing that he was actually the one with limited assets and no leverage. The game was accelerating, and Marcus still didn't know he was playing. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Forensic accountant wants to meet tomorrow. Says he found something interesting in Marcus's employment records. Also, I've identified his divorce attorney, Patricia Blackwood, partner at Hartwell and Associates. She's expensive, aggressive, and very careful about discovery requests. Perfect. Let them be careful and aggressive. Let them spend months building a case based on financial information that was about to become irrelevant. By the time they realized what had happened, the assets they were fighting over would be beyond their reach. I looked at Marcus sleeping peacefully beside me. This man who'd shared my bed while planning to destroy my life. Tomorrow, I would accelerate the timeline. Not just protecting assets, but positioning myself for a counterattack that would leave him with nothing but his pregnant mistress and a reputation in ruins. After all, if Marcus wanted to play divorce games, he was about to learn that I'd written the rulebook he didn't even know existed. The meeting with David Chen the next morning shattered what remained of my illusions about Marcus. Sitting in his sterile downtown office, surrounded by towers of financial documents and computer screens displaying complex spreadsheets, I watched as he systematically destroyed the image of the man I'd married. "Your husband has been embezzling." "From his own clients," David announced without preamble, sliding a thick folder across his glass desk. "Small amounts at first, then increasingly larger sums. We're talking about nearly $2 million over the past 3 years." I opened the folder with trembling hands. Page after page of bank records, wire transfers, and account statements painted a picture of systematic fraud. Marcus had been skimming money from client investment accounts, moving it through a series of personal accounts before ultimately investing it in high-risk ventures. "How is this possible?" I whispered, studying the evidence. "Blackstone has strict oversight protocols." "He's been very clever about it," David explained, pointing to specific transactions. The amounts were small enough to avoid immediate detection, and he timed the transfers during quarterly rebalancing periods when account fluctuations appear normal. But here's where it gets interesting. Some of this money ended up funding your joint investments. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? Remember that cryptocurrency portfolio you thought he funded with his bonuses? The one that's now worth $4 million? It was actually seeded with embezzled client funds. The real estate investments in Florida, the rare art collection, even some of the children's college fund deposits, they're all contaminated with stolen money. I sank back in my chair, the implications crashing over me like a tsunami. Not only was Marcus planning to divorce me and steal our assets, but he'd been building those assets with embezzled funds. If discovered, we could lose everything, and I could face criminal charges as an accessory. There's more, David continued grimly. Marcus has been particularly targeting elderly clients with large accounts. People who don't monitor their statements closely or have family members who might notice discrepancies. It's not just theft, it's predatory theft. The moral weight of this discovery was crushing. Marcus hadn't just betrayed me, he'd been stealing from vulnerable people while I unknowingly benefited from his crimes. The elegant lifestyle I'd thought we'd earned through hard work and smart investing was partially built on fraud. Can we trace exactly which assets are compromised? I asked, my mind already working through the legal implications. Already done. David handed me another file. I've color-coded everything. Green for clean assets funded entirely through legitimate sources. That's about 60% of your portfolio. Yellow for mixed assets where stolen funds were combined with legitimate money. Red for assets that are completely contaminated. I studied the breakdown, relief mixing with horror. The majority of our wealth was clean, built through my own financial strategies and Marcus's legitimate income. But the contaminated assets represented nearly $15 million, money that would need to be returned if the embezzlement was discovered. What about exposure? I asked. If this comes out during divorce proceedings? You'd be financially ruined and possibly facing criminal charges, David said bluntly. Even if you can prove you didn't know about the embezzlement, prosecutors might argue that you should have known. The lifestyle those stolen funds supported, the investments they made possible, it all creates liability. My secure phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Emergency meeting. Jennifer Walsh just met with Patricia Blackwood. They're accelerating the timeline. I showed David the message. His expression darkened further. They're moving fast because they know about the embezzlement, he realized. Marcus is planning to divorce you before the fraud is discovered, leaving you holding the bag while he disappears, with his pregnant mistress. The scope of Marcus's betrayal was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. Not only was he planning to abandon our family, but he was setting me up to take the fall for his crimes. The divorce wasn't just about starting fresh with Jennifer. It was about escaping prosecution by making me the target. Within an hour, I was back in Rachel's office with Margaret and David, the War Council now facing a crisis that went far beyond asset protection. The timeline has shifted, Margaret reported, spreading new photographs across the conference table. Jennifer and Patricia Blackwood met for 2 hours this morning. Based on their body language and the documents they were reviewing, they're preparing to file immediately. How immediately? Rachel asked. Possibly as early as tomorrow. Jennifer was taking notes about temporary custody arrangements and emergency support orders. They're not waiting the 2 weeks Marcus originally planned. Rachel's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up electronic filing systems. If they file tomorrow, we'll have less than 24 hours to respond before emergency hearings begin. That's not enough time to properly present our case. Unless we file first, I said quietly. The room fell silent. Everyone understood the implication. By filing first, I could control the narrative and timeline, but it would also mean abandoning any hope of catching Marcus off guard. There's another problem, David interjected. If the embezzlement investigation begins during active divorce proceedings, the court could freeze all assets pending resolution. That includes the clean money you've worked to protect. Margaret leaned forward. But if we can expose the embezzlement in a way that clearly separates Claire from Marcus's crimes, it might actually work in her favor. Judges don't look kindly on spouses who commit fraud, especially when children are involved. How do we expose it without implicating me? I asked. Anonymous tip to the SEC, David suggested. Provide just enough evidence to trigger an investigation, but focus on Marcus's solo activities. The bank records show that you weren't involved in the actual transfers or investment decisions for the contaminated assets. Rachel was already drafting documents on her laptop. We file for emergency divorce and full custody based on Marcus's fraud and infidelity. We present evidence that you discovered the embezzlement and are cooperating fully to return stolen funds. It positions you as the victim rather than the accomplice. What about the assets I've been moving? I asked. Will that complicate things? Actually, it helps, David replied. By separating your clean assets from the contaminated ones, you've inadvertently created evidence that you weren't part of the embezzlement scheme. The fact that you only moved money that was legitimately yours shows you knew the difference. Phone rang, Marcus calling for the first time during a workday in months. I showed the screen to the team. Answer it, Rachel advised. Act normal. We need to know what he knows. Hi, darling, I said, putting the phone on speaker. Claire, we need to talk. Marcus's voice was tense, lacking his usual casual confidence. Can you meet me for lunch, Le Bernardin, 1 o'clock? I checked my watch. It was already 11:30. That's short notice. Is everything all right? Everything's fine. There are some things we need to discuss. Important things about our future. The irony was perfect. Marcus was finally ready to have the conversation about our future, not knowing that I'd already planned it without him. Of course, I replied. I'll see you there. After hanging up, Margaret immediately began coordinating surveillance. I'll have teams at the restaurant and tracking Marcus's movements. If he's planning to serve you papers or create some kind of scene, we'll document everything. Rachel handed me a small recording device. It's voice-activated and completely legal in New York. Whatever he says, we'll have evidence. An hour later, I walked into Le Bernardin wearing my best performance of blissful ignorance. Marcus was already seated at our usual table, looking uncomfortably formal in his best suit. He stood to kiss my cheek, but I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. You look beautiful, he said, but his eyes were scanning the room nervously. Thank you. You seem tense. Bad day at the office? Marcus ordered wine. Expensive wine. The kind he only chose for special occasions or very bad news. As the sommelier poured, I watched my husband's face, trying to read the emotions playing across his features. Guilt, anxiety, determination, and something else. Fear. Claire, there's something I need to tell you, he began, his voice taking on the tone he used for difficult client conversations. Our marriage, it hasn't been working, for a while. I let surprise and hurt flicker across my face. What do you mean? I thought we were happy. We've been growing apart. You must have felt it too. The distance, the lack of connection. He reached across the table as if to take my hand, then seemed to think better of it. I think we both deserve to be with people who truly understand us. Are you saying you want a divorce? I whispered, injecting just the right amount of shock and pain into my voice. Marcus's relief was visible. He'd been expecting tears, begging, perhaps hysterics. Instead, he was getting a calm, reasonable conversation that would make his narrative much easier. I think it would be best for everyone, he continued. Including Emma and Ethan. Children are resilient, and they'll adjust better if we handle this maturely. Have you thought about custody arrangements? I asked, my voice carefully controlled. Well, realistically, my schedule is more stable. My income is more reliable. The children would have better opportunities living primarily with me. He was gaining confidence now, settling into what was clearly a rehearsed speech. You could see them every other weekend? Holidays? Summer vacation? I nearly laughed at the audacity. Marcus, who couldn't remember the last time he'd attended a parent-teacher conference, thought he should have primary custody of children he barely knew. What? About our assets? I asked. The house? The investments? The accounts? I've been thinking about that too. Obviously, most of our wealth comes from my career, my connections, my expertise. But I want to be fair. He pulled out a folder, not divorce papers, but a handwritten proposal. I'm thinking you could keep the house. I'll maintain a reasonable alimony for 5 years, and we'll split the liquid assets proportionally based on contribution. I reviewed his proposal, fighting to keep my expression neutral. According to Marcus's calculations, I would receive approximately $2 million total, less than 5% of our actual wealth. He was planning to keep the business interests, the investment portfolio, the retirement accounts, and all property except our primary residence, which he valued at far below market rate. This seems generous, I said carefully. You've put a lot of thought into this. I want what's best for everyone, he replied, but I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. He thought he was getting away with the perfect crime, embezzling. Millions, abandoning his family and leaving his wife with just enough money to avoid looking completely heartless. There's just one thing I'm curious about, I said, taking a sip of wine. These investment accounts you're keeping, the cryptocurrency portfolio, the Florida properties, some of the art collection. Where did the funding for those originally come from? For the first time during lunch, Marcus looked genuinely surprised. What do you mean? I've been reviewing our financial history, trying to understand how we built our wealth. Some of these investments were funded through sources I can't quite trace back to your salary or bonuses. The color drained from Marcus's face. That's complicated. Business ventures, private opportunities, nothing you need to worry about. But I do worry, I pressed gently. Especially if we're divorcing and dividing assets. I want to make sure everything is properly documented for tax purposes. Marcus was clearly struggling, caught between his desire to claim the assets and his need to avoid questions about their origins. Look, Claire, finance is complicated. There are aspects of wealth building that, well, let's just say you focus on the family, and I'll handle the business side. It was the perfect response. Condescending, dismissive, and completely incriminating. The recording device was capturing every word, every admission that he controlled our finances while hiding their true nature from me. Of course, I agreed, smiling sweetly. I trust you completely. Relief flooded Marcus's features. I knew you'd understand. You're an amazing woman, Claire. This doesn't change how much I respect you as a person and as a mother. When were you planning to make this official? I asked. Soon. This week, probably. I wanted to talk to you first. Give you time to adjust to the idea. He signaled for the check. Maybe we should tell the children this weekend, together as a united front. That sounds perfect, I lied. As we left the restaurant, Marcus kissed my forehead with what seemed like genuine affection. Thank you for being so understanding. This could have been much more difficult. I smiled, thinking about the emergency divorce filing Rachel was preparing, the evidence David had compiled, and the investigation that would soon destroy everything Marcus had, built through fraud and betrayal. You're absolutely right, I agreed. It could have been much more difficult. Walking away from Le Bernardin, I felt a strange sense of closure. The man I'd married 12 years ago, charming, ambitious, seemingly honorable, was gone. In his place was a stranger who stole from elderly clients, cheated on his wife, and planned to abandon his children for a pregnant mistress. But Marcus had made a critical error in underestimating me one final time. He thought lunch was his chance to manage the narrative and control the divorce process. Instead, He'd given me everything I needed to destroy him completely. The game was about to change from defense to offense, and Marcus had no idea what was coming. The emergency filing happened at 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday, exactly 3 hours after my lunch with Marcus. While he was probably back at his office, celebrating his successful manipulation of his naive wife, Rachel was standing before Judge Catherine Morrison in family court, requesting an emergency hearing based on evidence of fraud, infidelity, and imminent flight risk. I sat in the gallery, watching as Patricia Blackwood, Marcus's high-powered attorney, scrambled to respond to a filing she hadn't expected for another week. Her carefully prepared strategy was crumbling in real time, as Rachel presented evidence that painted Marcus not as a successful businessman seeking an amicable divorce, but as a criminal attempting to escape prosecution. "Your Honor," Rachel addressed the court with the precision of a surgeon. "We have documented evidence that Mr. Morrison has been systematically embezzling funds from his clients at Blackstone and Associates. These criminal activities have contaminated the marital estate and created an immediate risk to my client and her children." Patricia Blackwood shot to her feet. "Your Honor, this is clearly a desperate attempt to muddy the waters of what should be a straightforward divorce proceeding. My client has not been charged with any crime, and these allegations are supported by comprehensive financial documentation," Judge Morrison interrupted, reviewing the evidence packet David had prepared. "Ms. Chen, this forensic analysis is quite thorough. How long has this investigation been ongoing?" "My client discovered irregularities in their financial accounts just 3 days ago, Your Honor. As soon as she realized the scope of potential criminal activity, she retained forensic accounting services and immediately moved to protect legitimate assets from seizure." The judge's eyebrows rose. "Ms. Patterson, what is your client's response to these specific allegations of embezzlement?" Patricia looked trapped. She'd come prepared to argue about asset division and custody arrangements, not to defend against criminal fraud accusations with evidence she'd never seen before. "Your Honor, we request a continuance to review this evidence and prepare an appropriate response." "Motion denied," Judge Morrison replied sharply. "These are emergency proceedings based on allegations of ongoing criminal activity. Mr. Morrison needs to respond to these charges immediately, not after he's had time to coordinate with potential co-conspirators." I watched Patricia's face as she realized how thoroughly her client had been outmaneuvered. She'd built her strategy around controlling the narrative and timeline, never anticipating that the supposedly dependent housewife would strike first with evidence of criminal behavior. "Your Honor," Rachel continued, "we're also requesting immediate supervised visitation for Mr. Morrison. Our investigation has revealed that he's been conducting an extramarital affair with a pregnant subordinate, and we have evidence suggesting he may attempt to flee jurisdiction with his paramour before criminal charges are filed." The photographs Margaret had captured over months of surveillance flashed on the courtroom screen. Marcus and Jennifer at restaurants, hotels, medical appointments, the pregnancy ultrasound, the apartment listings in Jennifer's name, each image methodically destroying any pretense of Marcus as a devoted family man. "Furthermore," Rachel added, "we have recorded admissions from Mr. Morrison acknowledging his control over questionable financial assets while deliberately concealing their origins from his wife." The lunch recording played through the courtroom speakers. Marcus's voice, confident and condescending, admitting to managing complex financial arrangements while dismissing my concerns about their legitimacy. His own words became evidence of both his knowledge of the criminal activity and his deliberate exclusion of me from those decisions. Judge Morrison was taking detailed notes, her expression growing increasingly stern. "Ms. Patterson, does your client wish to make any statement regarding these allegations?" Patricia conferred quickly with Marcus, who had been escorted to court, in handcuffs after being arrested at his office an hour earlier. The SEC investigation had moved with lightning speed once David's anonymous tip provided them with a roadmap to the evidence. "Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence of all criminal charges and requests reasonable bail pending a full investigation." Bail is set at $5 million, Judge Morrison announced. Mr. Morrison's passport is to be surrendered immediately, and he is prohibited from accessing any financial accounts pending forensic review. I watched Marcus's face as the judge's words sank in. The man who'd thought he was orchestrating the perfect escape was now trapped in a web of his own criminal behavior, with bail set higher than his liquid assets and his carefully planned new life evaporating in real time. But the real shock came with Judge Morrison's next ruling. Regarding custody of the minor children, Emma and Ethan Morrison, I am awarding temporary full custody to Mrs. Morrison. Mr. Morrison's visitation rights are suspended pending resolution of the criminal charges and completion of a comprehensive psychological evaluation. The courtroom was silent, except for Marcus's sharp intake of breath. In less than 2 hours, he'd gone from planning to take custody of our children to being completely cut off from them. As for the marital assets, Judge Morrison continued, I am appointing a court-supervised administrator to oversee all accounts and properties pending final resolution. Mrs. Morrison's preemptive asset protection measures appear to have been prudent, given the criminal contamination of the marital estate. The final blow was delivered with clinical precision. Mr. Morrison is enjoined from contacting Mrs. Morrison except through counsel, and from approaching within 500 feet of the family residence, the children's school, or Mrs. Morrison's place of business. As court officers led Marcus away, his eyes found mine across the courtroom. For the first time since I'd discovered his betrayal, I saw genuine fear in his expression. The confident investment banker who'd been planning to discard his family while keeping our fortune was now facing federal criminal charges with no access to the money he'd stolen and no contact with the children he'd planned to claim. Outside the courthouse, Rachel was jubilant. That was better than I could have hoped. Morrison's attorney came completely unprepared, and the judge clearly understood the scope of his criminal behavior. Margaret joined us on the courthouse steps, having documented the entire proceeding for our files. Jennifer Walsh was arrested at her apartment 20 minutes ago. SEC raided Blackstone and Associates simultaneously. They've frozen all accounts associated with Marcus's client management. The coordinated strikes had been devastating in their precision. While Marcus was having lunch with me, thinking he was managing his soon-to-be ex-wife, law enforcement had been building cases that would destroy every aspect of his planned escape. What happens now? I asked, though I already knew the answer from months of planning. Now we wait for the criminal case to proceed while we finalize the divorce, Rachel explained. With Marcus facing federal fraud charges and you positioned as the victim who discovered and reported his crimes, the asset division becomes straightforward. David appeared with his laptop, showing real-time updates from the financial investigation. The contaminated assets are being traced back to their original sources. Victims will be compensated from Marcus's seized accounts, but the clean assets you protected are completely separate from the criminal proceedings. I thought about Marcus, sitting in a jail cell, probably still unable to fully comprehend how thoroughly his plans had collapsed. The man who'd spent months plotting to leave me with nothing while he started fresh with his pregnant mistress was now facing decades in federal prison with no assets and no freedom. The drive home was surreal. This morning, I'd been married to a successful investment banker planning a secret divorce. Tonight, I was a single mother whose husband was in federal custody for embezzling millions from elderly clients. The transformation felt dreamlike in its completeness. Emma and Ethan were waiting when I arrived home, having been picked up from school by my mother as planned. They knew something significant was happening. The presence of security personnel and their father's obvious absence created an atmosphere of uncertainty that children always sense. "Mom, where's Dad?" Ethan asked as I served dinner. "He said he'd help me with my science project tonight." I knelt down to their level, choosing my words carefully. "Dad has some very serious problems at work that he needs to solve. He won't be coming home for a while." Emma, always more perceptive than her brother, studied my face with Marcus's intelligent green eyes. "Is Dad in trouble?" "Yes, sweetheart. He made some very bad choices, and now he has to face the consequences." "Are we in trouble too?" she asked quietly. I pulled both children into a hug, feeling the weight of protecting them from the full scope of their father's betrayal. "No, babies. We're safe. Nothing that Dad did is your fault, and nothing that happens to him will hurt you." That night, after the children were asleep and the security team had settled into their positions around the house, I sat in Marcus's former office reviewing the complete financial picture. The court-appointed administrator would eventually untangle the complex web of legitimate and criminal assets, but the preliminary numbers were clear. Marcus's embezzlement had contaminated approximately $15 million of our wealth, money that would be returned to his victims through the criminal restitution process. But the remaining $32 million was clean, built through my financial strategies and Marcus's legitimate income over 12 years of marriage. More importantly, Marcus's criminal behavior had invalidated any claim he might have had to those assets. Under New York law, convicted felons cannot benefit from criminal activity in divorce proceedings. Even if he avoided prison time, which seemed unlikely given the evidence, he would emerge from the legal process with nothing. The irony was perfect. Marcus had spent months planning to leave me with a tiny settlement while he kept the fortune we'd built together. Instead, his criminal greed had cost him everything: his freedom, his children, his new relationship with Jennifer, and every penny of the wealth he'd tried to steal. My secure phone buzzed with updates throughout the evening. Jennifer's arrest had made the financial news, with reporters describing her as a co-conspirator in Marcus's embezzlement scheme. Her pregnancy, which Marcus had probably seen as the foundation for their new life together, was now just another complication in a criminal case that would define the rest of their lives. Blackstone and Associates had issued a statement distancing themselves from Marcus's activities and announcing full cooperation with federal investigators. His colleagues, the same men who'd probably envied his success and admired his beautiful wife, were now describing him as a rogue actor whose criminal behavior shocked everyone who knew him. The social media reaction was particularly brutal. Marcus's professional network was publicly severing ties. His country club had already revoked his membership, and his mother was fielding calls from reporters wanting comment on her son's arrest. The life he'd built through charm and apparent success was crumbling as thoroughly as his financial schemes. But perhaps the most satisfying development came near midnight, in a text from Margaret. Marcus attempted to contact Jennifer from jail. Call was recorded and will be used as evidence of continued coordination in criminal activity. His lawyer advised him to stop talking, but damage is done. I smiled, imagining Marcus's desperation as he realized that even his pregnant mistress was now beyond his reach. The man who'd thought he could orchestrate the perfect escape from his family responsibilities was learning that criminal behavior creates consequences that can't be managed or manipulated. As I prepared for bed in a house that now belonged entirely to me, I reflected on how completely the situation had reversed. This morning, Marcus had been planning my destruction while building his new life. Tonight, he was in federal custody while I was free to build whatever future I chose for myself and our children. The game Marcus had started with his secret divorce plans was over. He'd lost everything: his freedom, his fortune, his family, and his future. But more importantly, the children he'd planned to use as pawns in his custody battle were now safe from his toxic influence. Justice, I realized, wasn't just about punishment. It was about protection, accountability, and ensuring that people who hurt others face appropriate consequences for their choices. Marcus had chosen to betray his family and steal from vulnerable victims. Now he would spend years in prison contemplating those choices while Emma, Ethan, and I built a life free from his destructive influence. The perfect crime had become the perfect justice, and Marcus had orchestrated his own downfall through the Same arrogance and greed that had driven his criminal behavior. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the legal process continued. But tonight, for the first time in months, I fell asleep feeling truly secure. 3 weeks after Marcus's arrest, the full scope of his criminal enterprise became clear through the federal investigation. What had initially appeared to be simple embezzlement revealed itself as a sophisticated fraud operation that had been running for nearly 5 years, not 3 as David had originally estimated. I sat in the U.S. Attorney's office on a gray February morning, reviewing victim impact statements that painted a devastating picture of Marcus's cruelty. 87 clients had been robbed, most of them elderly retirees who had trusted him with their life savings. The stolen amounts ranged from $15,000 to $400,000 per victim, totaling over $8.3 million in confirmed theft. Mrs. Morrison, Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Williams addressed me across her mahogany desk. Your cooperation has been invaluable in building this case. The financial records you provided helped us trace money flows we might never have discovered. Otherwise. I just want these people to get their money back, I replied, studying photographs of some of Marcus's victims. They didn't deserve what he did to them. One photo particularly haunted me. Eleanor Chen, an 84-year-old widow whose late husband had entrusted Marcus with their retirement savings. Marcus had stolen $340,000 from her account over 18 months, leaving her unable to afford her assisted living facility. She'd been forced to move in with her daughter's family, her independence stolen along with her financial security. The restitution process is moving forward, Attorney Williams continued. We've identified approximately $12.8 million in recoverable assets from Mr. Morrison's seized accounts. Combined with the insurance policies his firm carried, most victims should recover at least 80% of their losses. I nodded, though the mathematics of justice felt cold compared to the human cost. Eleanor Chen might get most of her money back eventually, but she'd never recover the months of anxiety, the loss of dignity, or the trust that had been shattered by Marcus's betrayal. There's something else we need to discuss, Attorney Williams said, her tone becoming more serious. Jennifer Walsh has agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony has revealed additional aspects of your husband's criminal activity. She slid a thick transcript across the desk. Jennifer's deposition, given 3 days earlier, contained revelations that made my stomach churn. Not only had she been Marcus's accomplice in embezzlement, but she'd been actively recruiting other young employees at Blackstone to participate in the fraud scheme. According to Jennifer's testimony, Marcus had been using his affair with her as leverage to involve her in increasingly serious crimes. What had started as simple access to client files had evolved into Jennifer creating false documents, forging signatures, and even impersonating elderly clients during phone calls to financial institutions. She describes a pattern of escalating manipulation, Attorney Williams explained. Mr. Morrison would identify vulnerabilities in younger employees, initiate romantic relationships, then gradually involve them in criminal activity while making them feel complicit and trapped. I thought about Jennifer's pregnancy, wondering if that too had been part of Marcus's manipulation. Had he planned the pregnancy as another form of control, ensuring her loyalty through financial dependence and emotional blackmail? How many other employees were involved? I asked, dreading the answer. At least 4 others that we've identified so far. All young women, all initially recruited through inappropriate relationships with senior staff members. Attorney Williams paused, studying my reaction. Your husband appears to have been running what amounts to a criminal organization disguised as romantic affairs. The revelation was sickening. Marcus hadn't just been cheating on me with one mistress, he'd been operating a systematic scheme to sexually exploit and criminally manipulate young women while stealing from elderly clients. The man I'd been married to for 12 years was a predator in every sense of the word. We'll need you to testify at the sentencing hearing, Attorney Williams continued. Your perspective as both victim and unknowing beneficiary of the criminal Proceeds will be important for the judge to understand the full impact of Mr. Morrison's crimes. Driving home from the U.S. Attorney's office, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Vindication at seeing Marcus face appropriate consequences, but also horror at the scope of his criminal behavior. The man who'd shared my bed and fathered my children had been living a double life that involved victimizing the most vulnerable people in society. My phone rang as I pulled into our driveway, Rachel calling with updates on the divorce proceedings. "Financial audit is complete," she reported. "The court-appointed administrator confirmed your asset separation was entirely legal and appropriate. You're going to keep approximately $31.7 million in clean assets, plus the house, plus Marcus's retirement accounts that weren't contaminated by criminal activity." "What about his demands for alimony?" I asked, remembering Marcus's desperate attempts to negotiate from jail. Rachel laughed. "Claire, he's going to prison for probably 15 to 20 years. Convicted felons don't get alimony from their victims. In fact, you could probably sue him for emotional damages if you wanted to." The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if Marcus's toxic presence had been physically removed along with his belongings. Emma and Ethan were adjusting to their father's absence better than I'd expected, though they still asked difficult questions about why Daddy couldn't come home. That evening, after the children were in bed, I received an unexpected visitor. Eleanor. Chen's daughter Lisa had requested a meeting through the U.S. Attorney's office. She sat in my living room, a woman about my age holding a manila folder of documents. "Mrs. Morrison, I wanted to thank you personally," Lisa said, her voice tight, with emotion. "Your cooperation with the investigation is going to help my mother recover most of her savings." "I'm so sorry for what Marcus did to your family," I replied. "I had no idea he was stealing from people." Lisa studied my face, seeming to evaluate my sincerity. "The prosecutors explained that you were victimized too, in a different way. It must be difficult to learn that your entire marriage was built on lies." We talked for over an hour about the impact of Marcus's crimes on both our families. Lisa described watching her proud, independent mother struggle with the realization that she'd been conned by someone she'd trusted completely. The financial loss was devastating, but the emotional trauma was worse. Eleanor Chen now questioned every interaction, doubted her own judgment, and lived in constant fear of being deceived again. "Your husband stole more than money," Lisa said as she prepared to leave. "He stole my mother's confidence, her sense of security, her ability to trust people. That's harder to recover than the financial losses." After Lisa left, I sat alone in the living room thinking about the different ways Marcus had victimized people. His elderly clients lost their financial security and peace of mind. His young employees lost their careers and reputations while being sexually exploited. His children lost their father and their sense of family stability. And I had lost 12 years of marriage to a man who had never really existed. The next morning brought news that Marcus's mother, Patricia, wanted to visit the children. She'd been calling repeatedly since his arrest, alternating between denial about her son's crimes and desperate attempts to maintain contact with Emma and Ethan. "Absolutely not," Rachel advised when I called about the request. "She's been publicly defending Marcus and claiming he was framed. That kind of toxic influence is exactly what the children don't need right now." "But she's their grandmother," I said, though I agreed with Rachel's assessment. "She's the grandmother of children whose father is a convicted felon who stole from elderly victims and sexually exploited young women. Her primary loyalty is clearly to her criminal son, not to Emma and Ethan's well-being." The conversation with Rachel reminded me of how thoroughly Marcus's criminal behavior had contaminated every relationship in our lives. His parents, siblings, and close friends were all struggling to reconcile the charming man they thought they knew with the predator revealed through court proceedings. Some had chosen denial, insisting Marcus was being persecuted by overzealous prosecutors. Others had cut contact entirely, too embarrassed by association to maintain relationships. A few, like his brother David, had reached out to apologize and offer support, but even those conversations felt strained and awkward. Later that week, I received a letter from Marcus himself, smuggled out of the federal detention facility through his attorney. Reading his words felt like examining evidence from a crime scene. Every sentence revealed new layers of manipulation and self-deception. "Claire," the letter began, "I know you must hate me right now, but I need you to understand that everything I did was for our family. The investment opportunities I pursued were risky, yes, but they were meant to secure our future. The relationship with Jennifer was a mistake, but it didn't diminish my love for you and the children." The letter continued for 3 pages, painting Marcus as a victim of circumstances rather than the architect of his own criminal enterprise. He claimed the embezzlement was creative financial management, and that his victims were sophisticated investors who understood the risks. He portrayed Jennifer and the other young women as seductresses who had manipulated him, rather than employees he had exploited and coerced. Most disturbing was his final paragraph. "I know that with time and proper legal representation, we can resolve these misunderstandings and rebuild our family. The children need their father, and you need your husband. Don't let the prosecutors turn you against me permanently." The letter revealed Marcus's complete inability to accept responsibility for his actions. Even facing decades in prison, he was still trying to manipulate the narrative and control the people around him. The man who had stolen millions from elderly victims and sexually exploited young employees was portraying himself as a misunderstood businessman, whose only crime was taking risks to provide for his family. I showed the letter to Dr. Amanda Foster, the therapist I'd started seeing to process the trauma of discovering my husband's double life. Her response was immediate and chilling. "This is classic narcissistic behavior," Dr. Foster explained. "Marcus genuinely believes his own narrative. In his mind, he's the victim of persecution rather than the perpetrator of systematic fraud and exploitation. That makes him particularly dangerous, because he'll never stop trying to manipulate and control the people around him." "Even from prison?" I asked. "Especially from prison. Incarceration will intensify his need to maintain control over his image and relationships. Expect more letters, more attempts to contact the children, more efforts to recruit allies who will advocate for his version of events." Dr. Foster's prediction proved accurate. Over the following weeks, Marcus orchestrated a campaign of manipulation. From his jail cell that was almost as sophisticated as his criminal fraud scheme, letters arrived for Emma and Ethan, filled with expressions of love and promises to come home soon once the misunderstanding was resolved. He arranged for flowers to be delivered to the house on Valentine's Day with a card proclaiming his eternal devotion. He even had his mother create social media posts defending his character and attacking the prosecutors building the case against him. Each manipulation attempt was documented and added to the growing file of evidence that Marcus remained a threat to his family's well-being. The court-ordered psychological evaluation confirmed what Dr. Foster had suspected. Marcus exhibited classic signs of narcissistic personality disorder combined with sociopathic tendencies that made him unable to feel genuine empathy for his victims. The evaluation's conclusions were damning. Mr. Morrison demonstrates a pervasive pattern of grandiose self-regard, exploitation of others, and complete lack of remorse for his criminal behavior. His attempts to manipulate family members and potential witnesses while incarcerated suggest he represents an ongoing threat to victim safety and case integrity. In March, Jennifer gave birth to Marcus's son while serving her sentence in a minimum security federal facility. The baby was immediately placed with Jennifer's parents, another innocent victim of Marcus's criminal behavior. The child would grow up knowing his father as a convicted felon who had manipulated and exploited his mother, then abandoned them both when his crimes were discovered. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for early April, nearly 4 months after Marcus's arrest. As the date approached, I found myself struggling with complex emotions about testifying. Part of me wanted to see Marcus face justice for his crimes, but another part dreaded the public examination of our marriage and the media attention that would follow. "Your testimony is crucial," Attorney Williams explained during our preparation session. "The judge needs to understand not just the financial impact of Marcus's crimes, but the human cost to families and communities. You represent both the victims he stole from and the people he manipulated and betrayed." I spent hours crafting my victim impact statement, trying to find words that could convey the devastation Marcus had caused without descending into pure emotion. How do you explain to a judge that your entire adult life had been built on lies? That the man you'd trusted completely had been systematically victimizing vulnerable people while using the proceeds to fund a lifestyle you'd thought was earned through legitimate success? The night before the sentencing hearing, I stood in Emma and Ethan's doorway watching them sleep peacefully, protected from the chaos their father had created. They were resilient, adapting to our new reality with the flexibility that children possess, but I knew they would carry the scars of Marcus's betrayal for the rest of their lives. Tomorrow I would face Marcus in court for the first time since his arrest. I would look into the eyes of the man who had shared my bed while planning to destroy my life, who had fathered my children while victimizing other people's families, who had promised to love and protect me while systematically lying about every aspect of his existence. But I would also speak for Eleanor Chen and the other elderly victims who had trusted Marcus with their life savings. I would speak for Jennifer and the other young women he had sexually exploited and criminally manipulated. I would speak for Emma and Ethan, who deserved to grow up free from their father's toxic influence. Most importantly, I would speak for the version of myself who had believed in Marcus's lies and trusted in his love. That woman deserved justice too, and tomorrow she would finally get it. The game Marcus had started with his secret divorce plans was finally reaching its conclusion. He had gambled everything on his ability to manipulate and control the people around him, never imagining that his victims would find the strength to fight back. Tomorrow, he would learn the final cost of that miscalculation. The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan felt like a cathedral of judgment as I walked through its marble corridors on the morning of Marcus's sentencing. Media crews lined the steps outside, their cameras hungry for images of the investment banker whose fraud scheme had made national headlines. The pension predator, as the tabloids had dubbed him, was finally facing justice. I wore my navy Armani suit, the same one I'd worn to our wedding 12 years ago, though I doubted Marcus would remember. The symbolism felt appropriate. What had begun with promises of love and partnership was ending with betrayal and criminal conviction. Rachel walked beside me, carrying boxes of evidence and victim impact statements. Behind us came a procession of Marcus's victims and their families, elderly men and women who had traveled from across the country to witness the sentencing of the man who had stolen their retirement dreams. "Are you ready for this?" Rachel asked as we approached the courtroom doors. I thought about the question. Was anyone ever ready to confront the complete destruction of their life's most important relationship? To face the man they'd loved while surrounded by the wreckage of his criminal behavior? "I have to be," I replied. "Too many people are counting on this moment." The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Federal Judge Harrison Blake, known for his harsh sentences in white-collar crime cases, presided from the bench with stern authority. Prosecutors filled one side of the room while defense attorneys huddled around Marcus, who sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit that made him look smaller and older than I remembered. When our eyes met across the courtroom, Marcus's expression was unreadable. Not the charm that had once swept me off my feet, not the arrogance that had characterized his business dealings, but something hollow and calculating. He was still working angles, even now. "The court calls Claire Morrison to present her victim impact statement," Judge Blake announced. Walking to the podium felt like traversing an ocean. Every step carried the weight of 12 years of marriage, 2 children's futures, and dozens of victims seeking justice. The courtroom fell silent as I arranged my notes, acutely aware that Marcus was studying my every movement. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady despite the earthquake in my chest. "I stand before you today representing multiple perspectives on Marcus Morrison's crimes. I am his wife of 12 years, the mother of his children, and an unknowing beneficiary of his criminal proceeds. But I am also a victim of his systematic deception and manipulation." I looked directly at Marcus as I spoke, watching his face for any sign of genuine remorse. There was none. For over a decade, I believed I was married to a successful investment banker who provided for our family through hard work and expertise. I managed our household finances, raised our children, and supported his career while trusting completely in his integrity. That trust was a weapon he used against me and every other person he victimized. The statement I'd prepared was comprehensive, detailing not just the financial impact of Marcus's crimes, but the psychological destruction he'd inflicted on everyone who trusted him. I spoke about Eleanor Chen, who now checked her bank balance multiple times daily, terrified that someone else might be stealing from her. I described Jennifer Walsh, whose promising career had been destroyed by Marcus's sexual exploitation and criminal manipulation. "Marcus Morrison is not just a thief," I continued, feeling the power of truth in my voice. "He is a predator who targeted the most vulnerable people in our society. Elderly retirees who trusted him with their life savings, and young women who believed his promises of career advancement and personal affection." I detailed the pattern of manipulation Marcus had used throughout our marriage, how he'd controlled information while presenting himself as transparent, how he'd made me complicit in his lifestyle while hiding its criminal foundations. "The defendant has shown no genuine remorse for his actions," I stated, referencing his letters and manipulation attempts from jail. "Even while incarcerated, he continues trying to control and manipulate his victims, portraying himself as misunderstood rather than accepting responsibility for the devastating harm he has caused." When I finished speaking, the courtroom remained silent for several moments. Judge Blake was taking detailed notes, his expression grave as he processed the scope of Marcus's criminal behavior. "Thank you, Mrs. Morrison," he said finally. "Your statement demonstrates remarkable courage and clarity." Next came Eleanor Chen, supported by her daughter Lisa as she slowly approached the podium. At 84, she was the oldest of Marcus's victims, but her voice carried steel when she addressed the court. "Mr. Morrison stole more than my money," she said, her words carrying the weight of 8 decades of experience. "He stole my independence, my confidence, and my ability to trust other people. I worked for 60 years to save for retirement, and he took that security away with lies and fake documents." Her testimony was devastating in its simplicity. No complex financial analysis, no legal terminology, just the raw human cost of Marcus's greed. When she described having to move in with her daughter's family because she could no longer afford her assisted living facility, several jurors wiped away tears. One by one, victims took the podium to describe how Marcus's crimes had impacted their lives. Robert Torres, a 79-year-old widower whose wife's medical care had been compromised when Marcus stole their healthcare savings. Maria Santos, whose dreams of leaving an inheritance for her grandchildren had been shattered by Marcus's fraud. Each story added another layer to the portrait of Marcus as a predator who had systematically targeted society's most vulnerable members. The most powerful testimony came from Jennifer Walsh herself, brought from federal custody to speak at the sentencing. Pregnant when arrested, she had given birth while serving her sentence, and the physical and emotional toll was evident as she addressed the court. "Marcus Morrison destroyed my life," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He promised me career advancement and personal affection, then gradually involved me in criminal activity while making me feel complicit and trapped. When I tried to resist, he threatened to end my career and have me prosecuted as the mastermind of the embezzlement scheme." Jennifer's testimony revealed new details about Marcus's manipulation tactics, how he'd isolated her from friends and family, created financial dependence through expensive gifts and lifestyle upgrades, then used that dependence to coerce her participation in increasingly serious crimes. He told me that if I was ever caught, he would make sure I took the blame while he walked away clean. Jennifer continued. The pregnancy was his idea. He said having a child together would ensure my loyalty and make prosecutors less likely to seek harsh sentences against a new mother. The calculated cruelty of Marcus's behavior was breathtaking. He had planned Jennifer's pregnancy not from love or desire for family, but as another tool of control and manipulation. The baby born in federal custody was just another victim of his systematic exploitation. When the victim impact statements concluded, Judge Blake called for a recess before defense arguments. I remained in my seat, emotionally drained from reliving the devastation Marcus had caused. Across the courtroom, I could see him conferring with his attorneys, still trying to find angles and strategies even as victim after victim detailed the human cost of his crimes. During the recess, Patricia Morrison, Marcus's mother, approached me in the courthouse hallway. Her face was drawn with grief and denial, the look of someone whose world had been shattered by revelations about their loved one. "Claire, please," she said, her voice desperate. "You know Marcus isn't a monster. He made mistakes, yes, but he's still the father of your children. They need him." I looked at this woman who had raised the man who had victimized dozens of people while lying to his own family for years. Her pain was real, but so was her inability to acknowledge the scope of her son's criminal behavior. "Patricia, I understand this is difficult for you," I replied gently. "But Marcus made choices that hurt many people, including Emma and Ethan. They're safer without his influence right now." "He's changed," she insisted. "Prison has made him realize his mistakes. He wants to make amends, to be a better man." I thought about Marcus's letters from jail, his continued attempts to manipulate and control, his complete lack of genuine remorse during months of legal proceedings. "Marcus hasn't changed," I said firmly. "He's the same man who stole from elderly, victims, and exploited young women. The only difference is that now everyone can see who he really is." When court reconvened, Marcus's defense attorney, Patricia Blackwood, presented their argument for leniency. Her strategy was predictable: portray Marcus as a family man who had made poor decisions under pressure, emphasize his lack of prior criminal history, and request the minimum sentence under federal guidelines. "Your Honor," she argued, Morrison is not a career criminal. He is a father of 2 young children who made regrettable choices during a difficult period in his life. His family needs him, and he has expressed genuine remorse for his actions." The defense presentation felt hollow after hours of victim testimony. Blackwood's claims about Marcus's remorse were contradicted by his own letters and behavior while incarcerated. Her arguments about his family obligations rang false, given his plans to abandon Emma and Ethan for his pregnant mistress. Most damaging to the defense was the psychological evaluation that painted Marcus as a narcissistic manipulator, incapable of genuine empathy. Dr. Richard Stern, the court-appointed psychiatrist, testified that Marcus exhibited classic signs of antisocial personality disorder and represented an ongoing threat to public safety. "Mr. Morrison demonstrates a pervasive pattern of exploiting others for personal gain," Dr. Stern explained to the court. "His crimes were not aberrations or mistakes, but expressions of his fundamental character. He lacks the capacity for genuine remorse and will likely reoffend if given the opportunity." The prosecution's closing argument was delivered by Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Williams with prosecutorial precision. She systematically dismantled the defense's arguments while highlighting the scope and sophistication of Marcus's criminal enterprise. "This was not a momentary lapse in judgment," she told the court. "Marcus Morrison operated a systematic fraud scheme for over 5 years, targeting the most vulnerable members of our society while sexually exploiting young women in his workplace. He showed no mercy to his victims and deserves none from this court. She detailed how Marcus had used his position of trust to steal over $8.3 million from clients who depended on him for their financial security. How he had manipulated young employees through sexual relationships and career promises. How he had planned to abandon his family while leaving his wife to face potential criminal liability for his crimes. The defendant has shown no genuine remorse for his actions, Williams concluded. Even while incarcerated, he continues attempting to manipulate victims and witnesses. He represents a clear and ongoing danger to public safety and must be sentenced accordingly. When the prosecution finished, Judge Blake asked Marcus if he wished to make a statement before sentencing. This was his opportunity to show genuine remorse, to acknowledge the harm he had caused, to take responsibility for his choices. Marcus rose slowly, still handcuffed, and approached the podium. For a moment, I thought I saw something human in his expression, perhaps recognition of the devastation he had caused. But when he spoke, it was the same manipulative performance he had been giving throughout the proceedings. Your Honor, I want to express my deep regret for the pain I have caused, he began, his voice carrying the practiced sincerity of a skilled salesman. I made poor decisions during a difficult time in my life, and I understand that people were hurt by my actions. He spoke for 10 minutes, crafting a narrative that minimized his criminal behavior while maximizing his victimhood. He claimed financial pressure had driven him to make questionable investment decisions. He portrayed his relationship with Jennifer as a personal failing rather than systematic exploitation. He requested leniency for the sake of his children, whom he claimed to love deeply. Not once did he use the words embezzlement, fraud, or theft. Not once did he acknowledge the specific harm he had caused to elderly victims or young employees. Even facing decades in prison, Marcus was still trying to control the narrative and minimize his responsibility. Judge Blake listened impassively, occasionally taking notes but showing no reaction to Marcus's performance. When the statement concluded, he called for a brief recess to review sentencing guidelines and prepare his ruling. The wait felt eternal. Victims and their families sat quietly, hoping for justice that would acknowledge their suffering. Marcus's family members whispered among themselves, still clinging to hope for leniency. Attorneys on both sides reviewed their notes, knowing that the next few minutes would determine the rest of Marcus's life. When Judge Blake returned, the courtroom fell silent. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the final accounting of Marcus Morrison's crimes. Mr. Morrison, Judge Blake began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You have been convicted of multiple counts of wire fraud, mail fraud, and money laundering. The evidence presented demonstrates a systematic pattern of criminal behavior that victimized dozens of innocent people over a period of years. He detailed the scope of Marcus's crimes, the harm caused to victims, and the aggravating factors that warranted harsh punishment. The judge's analysis was thorough and damning, leaving no doubt about the severity of Marcus's criminal behavior. Your lack of genuine remorse, evidenced by your continued attempts to manipulate victims and minimize your criminal conduct, demonstrates that you pose an ongoing threat to public safety, Judge Blake continued. The court must impose a sentence that reflects the seriousness of your crimes, provides just punishment, and protects the community from further harm. The moment of sentencing had arrived. After months of legal proceedings, victim testimony, and evidence presentation, Marcus would finally face the consequences of his choices. Marcus Morrison, I hereby sentence you to 22 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are ordered to pay $8.3 million in restitution to your victims and forfeit all assets derived from your criminal conduct. The sentence hit like a thunderclap. 22 years. Marcus would be nearly 70 when released, his life effectively over. Emma and Ethan would be adults with families of their own, having grown up without their father's toxic influence. I watched Marcus's face as the reality sank in. For the first time since his arrest, his composure cracked. The manipulative charm vanished, replaced by genuine shock and fear. He was finally understanding that his actions had consequences he couldn't talk or charm his way out of. His mother collapsed in tears behind me, the sound echoing through the silent courtroom. His attorneys sat in stunned silence, knowing that appeals would be difficult given the overwhelming evidence and their clients' lack of cooperation. But around the courtroom, victims and their families were quietly celebrating. Justice had been served. The man who had stolen their security and dignity would spend the next 2 decades paying for his crimes. As court officers led Marcus away in shackles, our eyes met one final time. I saw no trace of the charming man I had married, no remnant of the father who had once read bedtime stories to our children. Only a broken criminal facing the consequences of his choices. The game Marcus had started with his secret divorce plans was finally over. His gamble on manipulation and control had failed spectacularly, costing him everything: his freedom, his family, his future, and his legacy. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that justice had been served, sadness for the man Marcus might have been, and determination to build a better future for Emma, Ethan, and myself. The ordeal was finally ending, but the healing was just beginning. 6 months after Marcus's sentencing, I stood in the construction zone that had once been his home office, watching workers tear out the mahogany paneling and marble flooring. Every trace of his presence was being systematically removed and replaced with something clean and new. A playroom for Emma and Ethan that would hold no memories of their father's criminal enterprise. "Mom, can we get a ping-pong table?" Ethan asked, bouncing excitedly as he surveyed the renovated space. At 9 years old, he had adapted to Marcus's absence with remarkable resilience, though I knew the questions would come as he grew older. "Absolutely," I replied, watching as Emma carefully measured the room's dimensions on her tablet. At 11, she was more analytical about the changes in our lives, asking fewer questions, but observing everything with Marcus's sharp intelligence. The house renovation was more than aesthetic. It was psychological cleansing. Every room that held memories of Marcus's lies was being transformed into something honest and functional. The formal dining room where he'd entertained clients became a library. His wine cellar was converted into a home theater. Even our master bedroom was completely redesigned, the California king bed where he'd planned my betrayal replaced with a comfortable queen-size suite that belonged entirely to me. Rachel arrived as the construction crew finished for the day, carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing the satisfied expression of an attorney who had just closed a complex case. "The final divorce decree was filed this morning," she announced, setting the champagne on what had once been Marcus's desk. "You are officially a single woman with full custody, complete financial independence, and 0 legal obligations to your ex-husband." I opened the champagne, a 2015 Dom Perignon that Marcus had been saving for a special occasion. This seemed appropriately special. The legal death of a marriage that had been built on systematic deception. "What about his appeals?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Denied at every level. 22 years stands, restitution payments are on schedule, and his parental rights have been permanently terminated based on the criminal conviction and psychological evaluation." Rachel accepted her glass with a toast. "Marcus Morrison legally no longer exists in your life." The children were spending the evening with my mother, giving Rachel and me time to review the complete financial settlement. The numbers were staggering. In their finality, Marcus had entered prison with nothing, while I emerged from the divorce with assets worth just over $34 million. "The Victim Restitution Fund is fully funded," Rachel reported, reviewing her notes. "All 87 Victims will receive 100% compensation plus interest. The insurance settlements covered the gap between seized assets and total losses. This had been personally important to me. While I couldn't undo the emotional trauma Marcus had caused his victims, ensuring full financial recovery felt like a form of justice that transcended legal proceedings. Eleanor Chen called yesterday, I mentioned. She wanted to thank me again for the extra compensation we provided above the court-ordered restitution. I had quietly established a victim support fund using money from Marcus's seized assets, providing additional payments to help with medical bills, therapy costs, and other expenses related to the fraud trauma. Eleanor Chen was back in her assisted living facility, her independence restored along with her financial security. "What about Jennifer Walsh?" Rachel asked. The question was complicated. Jennifer had served 18 months in minimum security, custody, giving birth to Marcus's son while incarcerated. She'd been released 3 months ago to supervised probation and was now living with her parents while trying to rebuild her life. "She's enrolled in community college studying accounting," I replied. "Apparently she wants to help other fraud victims recover their assets. The irony isn't lost on me." Jennifer had written me a letter from prison, apologizing for her role in Marcus's crimes and asking for forgiveness. I hadn't responded. The wound was still too fresh, the betrayal too complete. But I'd quietly ensured that Marcus's child would have a college fund waiting when he turned 18, kept separate from any contact with his criminal father. Margaret. Torres arrived as the sun was setting, carrying files that contained the final surveillance reports on Marcus's associates and family members. The private investigator had spent months documenting the ripple effects of his criminal conviction. "Blackstone and Associates declared bankruptcy last month," Margaret reported, settling into one of the new chairs I'd bought for the renovated office. The reputation damage from Marcus's fraud scheme destroyed their client base. 63 employees lost their jobs. Another layer of Marcus's destructive legacy. People who had worked alongside him for years, who had trusted in the firm's reputation, were now unemployed because of crimes they hadn't known about or participated in. "His parents are selling their house in Connecticut," Margaret continued. "The legal bills and social stigma have been devastating. They're moving to Florida to live near Patricia's sister." I felt a complex mix of emotions about Marcus's parents. Patricia's denial about her son's crimes had been frustrating, but they were also victims of his deception. Their retirement savings had been drained by legal fees. Their social circle had evaporated, and their relationship with their grandchildren was permanently severed. "What about his brother David?" I asked. "Transferred to his company's London office, complete career restart under different management. He's been very careful to distance himself from any association with Marcus's crimes." David Morrison had been one of the few family members to acknowledge the scope of Marcus's criminal behavior. He'd written a letter apologizing for his brother's actions and offering to testify if needed for any civil proceedings. It was a gesture I respected, even though we hadn't maintained contact. As Margaret and Rachel prepared to leave, I walked through the renovated house one final time. Every room told a different story now, no longer the carefully curated showcase of ill-gotten wealth, but a genuine home where Emma and Ethan could grow up free from their father's toxic influence. In the kitchen, I found a letter that had arrived that afternoon, forwarded from the federal prison where Marcus was serving his sentence. His correspondence was monitored and limited, but occasionally, letters still reached us through his attorneys. This one was different from his previous attempts at manipulation. The handwriting was less confident, the tone more desperate. Prison was clearly taking its toll on the man who had once commanded boardrooms and manipulated vulnerable people with polished charm. "Claire," the letter began, "I know you probably won't read this, but I need you to understand something that I've never been able to admit before. I was wrong about everything. Not just the crimes, but the fundamental way I viewed our marriage and our family." I almost stopped reading. Marcus's previous letters had been exercises in self-pity and manipulation. But something about this one felt different, more honest. I've had 18 months to think about the choices I made and the people I hurt. Not just the clients I stole from or the employees I exploited, but you and Emma and Ethan. I convinced myself that everything I did was for our family, but that was just another lie I told myself to justify my behavior. The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing Marcus's growing understanding of the harm he had caused. For the first time, he used specific language about his crimes: embezzlement, fraud, sexual exploitation. He acknowledged the trauma he had inflicted on his victims and the devastation he had brought to his own family. "I know that apologies are meaningless after what I've done," he wrote. "I know that Emma and Ethan are better off without me, and that you deserve a life free from the poison I brought into our marriage. I'm not asking for forgiveness or contact or second chances. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand the scope of what I destroyed." The letter ended with something I had never expected from Marcus: a genuine expression of remorse that didn't center his own victimhood or minimize his criminal behavior. It felt like the first honest communication we'd had in years, possibly ever. I sat in the kitchen for a long time, processing this unexpected glimpse of self-awareness from the man who had nearly destroyed our lives. Part of me wondered if this was another manipulation, a more sophisticated attempt to regain control over the narrative. But something about the tone and content felt different, less polished, more broken. Dr. Amanda Foster had warned me that this moment might come. Eventually, the reality of long-term incarceration breaks down even the most sophisticated psychological defenses, she'd explained. Marcus may eventually develop genuine insight into his behavior, but that doesn't mean he's safe or that reconciliation is appropriate. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the file with all his other correspondence. Whether genuine or manipulative, it was part of the record of our relationship's complete destruction and tentative possibility of his eventual rehabilitation. The next morning brought a call from Sarah Williams at the U.S. Attorney's Office. The case against Marcus's co-conspirators was finally reaching resolution, with the last of the young women he'd exploited accepting plea agreements. "The final restitution payments have been distributed," she reported. "Every victim has been made financially whole, and the additional compensation fund you established has been fully allocated. This case is officially closed from our perspective." "What happens to Marcus now?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why I cared. "He's been transferred to a medium-security facility in Pennsylvania. Good behavior, participation in rehabilitation programs, genuine remorse in his interactions with other inmates and staff. The psychological evaluation shows significant progress in developing empathy and accepting responsibility." It was strange to hear that Marcus was apparently becoming the person I'd thought I married, someone capable of genuine remorse and personal growth. But that development was happening 20 years too late to save our marriage or protect his victims from the harm he'd already caused. "He's been corresponding with some of his elderly victims," Sarah continued. "Letters of apology that don't request forgiveness or contact, just acknowledgement of the harm he caused. Several victims have told us these letters helped with their emotional recovery." I thought about Eleanor Chen, who had mentioned receiving a letter from Marcus but hadn't shared its contents. Perhaps his newfound capacity for genuine remorse was helping his victims find closure, even if it couldn't undo the trauma he'd inflicted. After hanging up with Sarah Williams, I called Dr. Foster to process this unexpected development in Marcus's psychological journey. "It's not uncommon for long-term incarceration to create genuine personality change," she explained. "The complete loss of control and status can break down narcissistic defenses and create space for real self-reflection. But Claire, even if Marcus has genuinely changed, that doesn't erase the harm he caused or make him safe to be around." "I know," I replied. "I'm not considering reconciliation or contact. I'm just trying to understand how to process this information. Process it as evidence that people can change, but also as confirmation that your decision to protect yourself and your children was correct." Marcus's potential rehabilitation doesn't retroactively justify his criminal behavior or make him an appropriate presence in Emma and Ethan's lives. That afternoon, I picked up the children from school and drove to Central Park, where we often went to process difficult emotions in a neutral, peaceful environment. Emma had been asking more questions about her father lately, prompted by classmates whose parents had heard about the case through news coverage or social media. "Mom, why did Dad hurt those old people?" Emma asked as we sat on a bench watching Ethan chase pigeons. I had prepared for this conversation for months, consulting with child psychologists about how to explain Marcus's crimes without traumatizing the children or destroying their ability to trust other people. "Your father made very bad choices that hurt many people," I replied carefully. "He stole money from people who trusted him, and he lied to our family about what he was doing. Sometimes adults make choices that are so harmful that they have to go to prison for a very long time." "Will he ever come home?" Ethan asked, having abandoned his pigeon chase to join our serious conversation. "No, sweetheart. Your father will be in prison until you're both grown up with families of your own. That's the consequence for the choices he made." Emma processed this information with her characteristic analytical approach. "Are we safe now?" "Yes. Baby, we're completely safe. The people who might have been hurt by Dad's choices are being taken care of, and we have a good life together." The conversation continued for over an hour, with both children asking thoughtful questions about justice, consequences, and how to make good choices in their own lives. They were resilient and wise beyond their years, shaped by adversity into young people with strong moral compasses. Driving home, I reflected on how completely our lives had been transformed. A year ago, I had been married to a successful investment banker, living in apparent prosperity while unknowingly benefiting from criminal proceeds. Today, I was a single mother with genuine wealth built through legitimate means, raising children who understood the importance of honesty and integrity. The house felt peaceful as we returned home, construction complete and every trace of Marcus's presence erased. Emma settled into the new library to work on homework while Ethan tested the acoustics in the converted home theater. Normal childhood activities in a home free from the toxicity of their father's criminal behavior. That evening, after the children were asleep, I sat in my redesigned office reviewing financial statements that showed the complete picture of our new life. The investment portfolio was growing steadily through legitimate strategies. The children's college funds were fully secured, and charitable giving was providing meaning beyond personal wealth accumulation. I had established the Morrison Foundation for elder financial protection, using part of Marcus's seized assets to fund programs that helped elderly people avoid investment fraud. The foundation also provided therapy and support services for victims of financial crimes, expanding the work beyond simple restitution to genuine healing. The Victim Support Fund had evolved into a permanent program that helped people rebuild their lives after financial exploitation. Eleanor Chen had become a volunteer speaker, sharing her story to help other elderly people recognize and avoid fraudulent schemes. Her transformation from victim to advocate was inspiring and gave deeper meaning to the foundation's work. As I prepared for bed in my renovated master suite, I received one final message of the day, a text from Jennifer Walsh. We had maintained no contact since Marcus's sentencing, but occasionally she sent updates about her progress rebuilding her life. Graduated community college today, the message read. Starting work next week as a victim advocate with the State Attorney General's office. Thank you for the college fund for my son. He won't grow up knowing about his father's crimes until he's old enough to understand and make his own choices. I typed back a simple response. Congratulations on your graduation. You've worked hard to rebuild your life. It felt like closure on one of the most complicated aspects of Marcus's criminal legacy. Jennifer had been both victim and co-conspirator, exploited young woman and willing participant in fraud. Her transformation from Marcus's accomplice to advocate for financial crime victims represented the possibility of redemption even in the darkest circumstances. Looking out the bedroom window, at the city lights, I reflected on the unexpected turns my life had taken. The discovery of Marcus's divorce papers had set in motion a chain of events that exposed criminal behavior affecting dozens of people, destroyed a sophisticated fraud scheme, and ultimately created opportunities for genuine healing and justice. The game Marcus had started with his secret plans to abandon our family and steal our assets had ended with complete victory for his victims and total defeat for his criminal enterprise. But more importantly, it had created space for Emma, Ethan, and me to build authentic lives based on truth rather than deception. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. The children would continue growing into thoughtful, ethical, young people. The foundation would expand its work helping fraud victims. I would explore new investments and philanthropic activities that created positive impact beyond personal wealth. But tonight, for the first time in over a year, I fell asleep feeling completely secure in a life built on truth, justice, and genuine accomplishment rather than criminal proceeds and systematic deception. The reckoning was complete, and the healing had truly begun. 2 years after Marcus's sentencing, I stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York, delivering a keynote address on financial crimes against vulnerable populations. The woman at the podium bore little resemblance to the naive housewife who had discovered divorce papers in her husband's briefcase. That woman had been defined by what she didn't know. I was now defined by what I had learned and how I was using that knowledge to protect others. Ladies and gentlemen, I addressed the packed auditorium. Financial predators like my former husband don't just steal money, they steal dignity, independence, and trust. But survivors of financial crimes can become powerful advocates for systemic change that protects future victims. The Morrison Foundation had grown into an international organization with offices in 12 countries. Our work had expanded beyond elder fraud prevention to include comprehensive financial literacy programs, victim support services, and legislative advocacy for stronger white-collar crime penalties. What had begun as personal justice had evolved into a global movement. In the audience, I could see Eleanor Chen, now 86 and serving as the Foundation's senior victim advocate. Her transformation from traumatized fraud victim to powerful public speaker had inspired thousands of other survivors to find their voices. Beside her sat Dr. Amanda Foster, who had become our chief psychological consultant, helping develop trauma-informed approaches to financial crime recovery. The perpetrator in my case received a 22-year sentence, I continued, but punishment alone doesn't heal communities. True justice requires systemic change, victim empowerment, and the transformation of trauma into advocacy. After my speech, the reception was filled with international law enforcement officials, victim rights advocates, and financial industry leaders. The conversation buzzed with discussions of new anti-fraud technologies, legislative initiatives, and cross-border cooperation strategies. I had become fluent in the language of global financial crime prevention, my personal experience providing credibility that policy expertise alone couldn't match. Mrs. Morrison approached Detective Inspector Sarah Halifax from Scotland Yard's Economic Crime Unit. Your Foundation's training materials have been invaluable in our recent prosecutions. The psychological profile framework you developed has helped us identify predatory patterns before they escalate. These conversations felt surreal sometimes. 5 years ago, I had been managing household budgets and attending PTA meetings. Now I was consulting with international law enforcement on sophisticated financial crime investigations. Marcus's betrayal had inadvertently launched a career I'd never planned, but found deeply meaningful. The flight back to New York gave me time to review updates from the children, who were now 14 and 12 respectively. Emma was student, body president at her prep school, showing early signs of the leadership abilities that would probably take her into law or public service. Ethan had discovered a passion for computer programming and was already building apps that helped elderly people manage their finances securely. Both children had thrived in the aftermath of Marcus's removal from their lives. Regular therapy sessions had helped them process their father's crimes without internalizing shame or developing trust issues. They understood that Marcus's choices were his responsibility alone, not a reflection of their worth or their family's character. The most remarkable development was their decision to get involved with the Foundation's youth education programs. Emma gave presentations to high school students about recognizing financial manipulation tactics. Ethan had created a mobile app that helped seniors verify investment opportunities through trusted family members. They had transformed their personal trauma into tools for protecting others. "Mom, there's something we want to discuss when you get home," Emma's text message read. "It's about Dad." My stomach tightened slightly. The children rarely brought up Marcus anymore, having processed most of their feelings about his absence through therapy and time. Any new development involving their father usually meant complications I'd hoped to avoid. At home that evening, I found Emma and Ethan waiting in the library with serious expressions that reminded me painfully of Marcus during his most manipulative moments. But their intentions were entirely different from their father's. They wanted to discuss visiting him in prison. "We've been talking to Dr. Foster about this for months," Emma explained, her voice carrying the careful precision she'd inherited from both parents. "We think we're ready to see Dad, not because we want a relationship with him, but because we need closure." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "We want to understand who he really is now, not just remember who we thought he was before. Dr. Foster says it might help us trust our own judgment better in the future." The request was both mature and heartbreaking. At 14 and 12, my children were grappling with psychological concepts that most adults struggled to understand. They wanted to confront the reality of their father's transformation not for reconciliation, but for their own emotional development. "What does Dr. Foster recommend?" I asked, though I already suspected her response. "She thinks a single, supervised visit might be therapeutic," Emma replied. "Just to see him as he really is now, answer any questions we have, and say goodbye properly. She'd be there with us, and you could come too if you wanted." I thought about Marcus's letters over the past 2 years, which had shown consistent evidence of genuine remorse and psychological growth. Prison psychologists reported that he was participating actively in therapy, helping other inmates with financial literacy education, and showing no signs of the manipulative behavior that had characterized his previous interactions. "This isn't about forgiving him or having a relationship," Ethan clarified. "It's about not being afraid of him anymore. Right now, he's this scary mystery person we're not allowed to think about. Maybe if we see that he's just a sad man in prison, we won't have to carry that fear around." Their emotional intelligence was remarkable. They understood that avoiding Marcus indefinitely might give him continued power over their psychological development. By confronting him directly, they could reclaim agency over their own healing process. 3 weeks later, I sat in the visiting room of the Federal Correctional Institution in Pennsylvania, watching my children prepare to meet their father for the first time in over 2 years. Dr. Foster had spent hours preparing them for this encounter, discussing what they might see and feel. Marcus entered the visiting room wearing standard prison clothes, his once polished appearance replaced by something quieter and more genuine. The arrogant investment banker was gone, replaced by a middle-aged man whose eyes carried the weight of understanding what he had destroyed. "Emma? Ethan?" he said quietly, his voice lacking any of the manipulative charm I remembered. "Thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult." The conversation that followed was unlike anything I had expected. Marcus answered their questions honestly, about his crimes, his victims, the choices that had led to his imprisonment. He acknowledged the harm he had caused without minimizing it or seeking sympathy. Most importantly, he made no attempts to manipulate or control the interaction. "I want you to know that none of this was your fault," he told them. "The crimes I committed, the lies I told, the way I betrayed our family, Those were my choices. You deserved a better father, and your mother deserved a better husband. Emma asked the question I had been dreading. Do you love us? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes filling with tears. I thought I did. But I've learned that love means protecting people, not using them. I used everyone in my life, including you and your mother, to serve my own needs. That wasn't love. It was selfishness disguised as love. The honesty was brutal and necessary. Marcus was acknowledging that his previous expressions of love had been contaminated by his criminal behavior and manipulative personality. Only now, facing the consequences of his choices, was he developing the capacity for genuine care that prioritized others' well-being over his own needs. Will you try to contact us when you get out of prison? Ethan asked. No, Marcus replied firmly. You'll be adults by then, capable of making your own choices about relationships. If you ever want to see me again, it will be your decision. I won't intrude on the life your mother has built for you. The visit lasted 2 hours, covering topics that ranged from Marcus's daily routine in prison to his understanding of the harm he had caused his victims. Throughout the conversation, he maintained the same tone of quiet accountability, never slipping into the manipulative patterns that had characterized our marriage. As we prepared to leave, Marcus stood to say goodbye. Claire, he said, looking directly at me for the first time during the visit. I know apologies are meaningless after what I did, but I want you to know that watching what you've built from the destruction I caused, the foundation, the advocacy work, the way you've raised our children, it's shown me what genuine strength and integrity look like. I nodded, acknowledging his words without offering forgiveness or reconciliation. Some betrayals were too complete for relationship repair, but understanding and closure were still possible. During the drive home, Emma and Ethan processed what they had experienced. The visit had accomplished exactly what Dr. Foster had predicted. It had transformed Marcus from a scary unknown figure into a broken man facing appropriate consequences for his choices. They no longer needed to fear him or wonder about his current state. He seemed different, Emma observed. Smaller somehow, not scary anymore. I think prison really did change him, Ethan added. But that doesn't mean he gets to be our dad again. Their psychological maturity was remarkable. They understood that people could change while still facing permanent consequences for their past actions. They had gained closure without compromising their own safety or well-being. 6 months after the prison visit, I received notification that Marcus had been transferred to a minimum security facility in recognition of his exemplary behavior and participation in rehabilitation programs. He was teaching financial literacy classes to other inmates and working on a book about recognizing and avoiding investment fraud. Even his rehabilitation was focused on helping others avoid the crimes he had committed. The transformation seemed genuine, but it remained irrelevant to our lives. Emma and Ethan had processed their relationship with their father and moved forward. I had built a new life dedicated to protecting others from financial predators. Marcus's potential redemption was meaningful for him and perhaps for society. But it didn't change the necessity of the consequences he was facing. On the 5th anniversary of discovering Marcus's divorce papers, I stood in our completely renovated home, preparing for a celebration that had nothing to do with our former marriage. The Morrison Foundation was receiving the United Nations Human Rights Award for our work in financial crime victim advocacy. Emma and Ethan, now 17 and 15, had both been accepted to present at the ceremony. Mom, do you ever regret how everything happened? Emma asked as we prepared for the event. I thought about the question carefully. Did I regret discovering Marcus's betrayal? Did I regret the pain of learning that my marriage was built on lies? Did I regret the necessity of destroying his life to protect his victims? I regret that your father made choices that hurt so many people, I replied. I regret that you had to grow up without a father because he chose criminality over integrity. But I don't regret fighting back when I discovered his plans to destroy our family while victimizing vulnerable people. What if he had been honest about wanting a divorce instead of trying to steal everything? Ethan asked. Then we would have had a difficult but straightforward divorce, and he wouldn't be in prison right now. His criminal behavior made everything else necessary. That evening, standing before an international audience receiving recognition for work that had grown from personal trauma, I reflected on the unexpected trajectory of our lives. Marcus's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also revealed strength and purpose I might never have discovered otherwise. The Foundation's work had prevented thousands of financial crimes, helped victims recover billions of dollars, and changed legislation in multiple countries. Emma and Ethan had grown into remarkable young people with strong moral compasses and deep empathy for others. I had found meaningful work that transformed personal pain into global impact. In my acceptance speech, I didn't mention Marcus by name, but I spoke about the importance of turning victimization into advocacy, of using personal experience to create systemic change, of refusing to let criminals define the narratives of their victims' lives. Predators count on silence, shame, and isolation to protect their ability to harm others, I told the audience. When survivors find their voices and use their experiences to protect others, we create accountability that extends far beyond individual cases. After the ceremony, Emma and Ethan joined me on stage for photos. 3 survivors who had built something meaningful from the wreckage of Marcus's crimes. We looked like what we were. A family that had faced devastating betrayal and emerged stronger, more purposeful, and committed to protecting others from similar harm. Later that night, as we returned home to New York, Emma asked one final question. About Marcus. Do you think he's proud of what we've accomplished? I considered the question carefully. The Marcus I had married would have been jealous of our success and resentful of the attention we were receiving. But the man we had visited in prison, the one who seemed to have developed genuine remorse and empathy, might indeed feel something like pride. I think the person he's become probably is proud of what you've accomplished, I replied. But that doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that you're proud of yourselves and the positive impact you're making in the world. Standing in our home that night, surrounded by evidence of lives rebuilt on truth and purpose, I realized that Marcus's plan to destroy our family and steal our assets had failed in the most complete way possible. Not only had he lost everything, freedom, family, fortune, and reputation, but his victims had transformed their trauma into powerful advocacy that would protect countless others. The game he had started with secret divorce papers and criminal schemes had ended with his complete defeat and our complete victory, but more importantly, it had ended with justice, healing, and positive change that extended far beyond our personal situation. Emma and Ethan would grow up knowing they had turned their father's betrayal into protection for others. I would continue, building work that gave meaning to the trauma we had endured. And Marcus would serve his sentence knowing that his crimes had ultimately created more good in the world than harm, through the foundation and advocacy work that had grown from his victim's response to his predatory behavior. 5 years after discovering those divorce papers in Marcus's briefcase, I finally understood that the best revenge wasn't just defeating someone who tried to destroy you. It was building something so meaningful from their attempt at destruction that their betrayal ultimately served a purpose larger than they could ever have imagined. Justice, it turned out, wasn't just about punishment. It was about transformation, protection, and the refusal to let criminals have the final word in their victims' stories. The woman who had found those papers was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and committed to ensuring that Morrison's criminal legacy would be overshadowed by the positive change his victims had created in response to his crimes. The game was over, and everyone who mattered had won. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.